Welcome to the 82nd episode of Tomes and Tunes. I am your host, Arielle Silver. I am a song maker, storyteller, all kinds of other things as well. And I do most of it since COVID started right here in my little she shed in Los Angeles, my little backyard she shed, my little slice of heaven on earth. I am really delighted every week to bring a different songwriter from somewhere in the world onto this show. We talk about books, which is one of my favorite topics, and we swap some songs, and it's just really delightful. It's been going on now since the beginning of COVID. We're in this 82nd episode, and today I'm traveling up to Northern California virtually to talk with my songwriter guest, Kray Van Kirk. He and I met at a Folk Alliance event earlier this year, or I should say a couple months ago last year. And I just really loved his energy. I couldn't wait to get him on the show. So let me bring him on right now. Hi.
Hi. How are you?
Kray, it was just so fun at the...
I have my books.
Oh, I love... Nicely done. Wow, that's quite a stack there. I just really enjoyed our banter in the chat boxes and everything during the Folk Alliance conference. I forget which one it was. It was one of the regional ones.
I think it was Farm, but I was at all of them virtually.
Yeah.
So you were at more than just Farm, I think. So
yeah, I was at NERFA also and Far West.
Yeah, NERFA.
Yeah. And it's so funny because I really had no idea that you were in California. Like, oh yeah, there's another California person right there. I thought that you were in the Midwest or actually you spent a lot of time in Alaska. So,
yeah,
I had no
but
idea.
you're in Los Angeles and I'm by the Oregon border. So the distance between you and me, I might as well be in
Yeah, it's like
Odessa, Texas.
well played. Very nice. Yeah, it's that took me a while when I went from the East Coast to the West Coast. There are only 3 states here. Well, not including Alaska, of course, but in the continental U.S., just the 3 states for the entire coast. Whereas
From Mexico to Canada, yes.
Yeah, and on the East Coast, it's like 20,000 states. That's accurate.
There's no hyperbole in that statement.
None at all. None at all. So tell me about Humboldt. I have never been to Humboldt County, land of weed and wine, right?
At least of weed. The wine, there's some wine, some vineyards around here, but
right?
mostly it starts south of us, down
Okay.
near Santa Rosa. I am behind what is called the Redwood Curtain. The only way to get to Humboldt County is to, regardless of whether you're coming from the south or the north or the east, is to go through these little tiny twisty roads that lead through the mountains that are often closed because of landslides or wildfires to get to Humboldt County. And in some ways, when I was living in Alaska, I was more accessible because I was living on an island and then on part of the mainland that had no road access. The only way in or out was by boat or airplane. But I could get on a plane and be in Seattle in 2 or 2.5 hours, and from there I could go anywhere. Here, there are still times when all 3 accesses are closed and you can't get in except by an airplane. And so I'm in the middle of the Redwood Forest.
You're an island, even though you're part of the mainland.
That is very, very true. The gas is more expensive here than it is in Hawaii. It's just insane. As soon as you go through the Redwood Curtain, all bets are off. And so we came here in the late 60s. My father got a position teaching at Humboldt. And back then, Humboldt County was divided between the timber industry and the fishing industry. And then a bunch of old hippie PhD Berkeley back to the landers who left the Bay Area and came up here, and they built these little tiny homes squirreled away in the woods and grew some weed and communed with the energy of the uttermost or whatever. And it's a pretty unique place, and I still, it's changed a lot, but I still love living here.
Wow, that sounds beautiful, and yeah, interesting, intriguing.
Interesting is a good euphemism for living here.
You know, I feel like the word interesting is the least interesting word in the English language. It's one of those words. I was in single digits living in Queens, New York, so second grade, and I remember this doctor said something to me. My grandmother worked at a doctor's office, and her boss said something to me, and I said, "Oh, interesting," and he just looked at me like, "That's your fallback word for, like, you're not even paying attention."
You're not paying attention.
So, yeah, but I am intrigued by Humboldt. I found myself crawling through some websites kind of recently that I think first piqued my curiosity about that area. I had not known much about it except for, what you're most known for, which is the weed, I think.
Which is the weed, yes. Which is the weed.
But there's some sweet little venues, or maybe pre-COVID, right? There's community there.
There is community here, yes.
Yeah.
And there are all these little tiny towns stuck in the middle of, on each side of each hill. And we have some friends that run a little place about 30 miles south of us called Shake Fork Farm. And it's completely independent. They have gotten the animals and the vegetables and everything down, recycling and dragging things and using the waste of one for the input of the other,
Yeah.
to where they only need to bring in some wood chips at the end of every year to restore the carbon balance of
Wow.
the inputs. So otherwise, they're completely neutral in their output, and that's where we get all of our vegetables and meat and everything from that farm. And that's something, I know it exists back east and in other places I've been, just, I don't have much experience, but here it's this real foundational activity. We have the farmers markets up on the town square every year, or every weekend throughout the entire year, and whatever's in season gets brought there. And so even if the apocalypse comes, we may survive a little bit longer.
I think we just had it. I think that was.
Did we just have it? Okay.
I think we're living in post-apocalyptic times right now.
It may be. I'll
Yeah.
practice my Australian accent. Go out into the wasteland.
Oh no. What is that book? On the Beach. It was turned
On the
into a
Beach?
movie.
I
Yeah.
don't know that one.
Oh gosh. It's about post-nuclear war or nuclear war. I read it when I was a kid, and it just devastated me. Powerful though. Yeah. But it takes place.
Well,
in
there's
Australia.
David Brin and The Postman that Kevin Costner made into a movie, and that all takes place here on the West Coast.
Have you read Overstory? I'm blanking on the author's name right now. But it's
Overstory.
It's about trees. On the Beach, yes. Lewis Klein. Hello. Nice to have you
Lewis!
here. Yes.
Hey! How are you, sir? I don't know if I can hear you, but
Overstory. It's about trees.
Yes, my father was just reading that. He just read that a few months ago. Dad reads voraciously.
Okay. I've never met your father, but I totally love him. Everything that you have said about him in the pre-show, green room when we were talking, and he just sounds like a force.
He's interesting. Dad will be 94 in April, and he still goes to the gym 2 hours a day. He gets frustrated when he can't do what he used to do. And he still gets in his truck and drives over these narrow mountain windy roads to go fly fishing on these big Pacific Northwest steelhead rivers. And he's a bit of a curmudgeon, which for some reason endears him to my wife. She just loves it. And I'm like, I don't get it.
So he's reading Overstory. I think that, in fact, I'm 99% sure that part of it takes place in Humboldt County. That is where there's a major plot point that takes place in that area. I think so.
It may be. I don't know. I haven't read it. I know now he's moved on to. I think he's reading 1491. We gave him that one to read about
1491.
indigenous civilizations that existed on this continent, both north and south,
Before.
before the influx of the colonialism from the Spanish and the French
Yeah.
and the English. And
That
that
sounds
one's just
intriguing.
depressing.
That sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
Yeah, depressing, but intriguing. There was
And
a piece written in the New Yorker years ago that I clipped out. I have it here in the shed, and every once in a while I pull it out to read it. It's about September 10th, 2001, in Windows on the World in the World Trade Center in New York. And it talks about, what was happening in Windows on the World that night, the night before everything changed, right? But
Yeah.
there's something very intriguing about that to envision a world before. In fact, have you seen the movie that's newly out called Don't Look Up?
Don't Look Up? No, I have been resisting watching it because I think it would be too depressing because I am not a climate scientist. I don't even play one on TV. But the whole issue of climate change and the orchestrated and funded climate denial is extremely difficult for me to handle without becoming really angry in a way that's not productive. And I have to say, being angry is a
Yeah.
white privilege, because if you get angry and you're not a white male, well, then you're dismissed as being shrill, or if you're not white, boy, then you're dismissed as being,
Yeah.
there have to be better ways of dealing with things. But I find climate change to be extremely discouraging when, with some exceptions, I can read the peer-reviewed papers coming in the scientific journals, because that's where I
Yeah.
used to publish my stuff. And I can look at it just right there, and then I see all the other stuff that's being published about, oh, scientists don't know what they're talking about, oh, they've been wrong for years, and none of it's true. Or it's a deliberate, a disingenuous skewing of something like statistical uncertainty. And yeah.
Right.
So I have
Yeah,
resisted
yeah.
seeing Don't Look Up.
Yeah. Well, there's this moment at the very end where one of the characters says, just as the world is about to end. Spoiler.
What?
I know you should usually say spoiler alert before you spoil it, but anyway, this one line, he says, something like, "Well, we had it pretty good," or we didn't realize how great we had it," or something like that. And that idea of like the day before, like 1491 or September
Yeah.
10th, or pre-COVID, or it's
Yeah.
like those moments in time where life was normal. We couldn't envision what would happen the next day or the next year.
No, and I think that's one of the values of, you're talking about books, it's one of the values of stories and myth, because they lay out the story in front of you and give it context, so that when
Yeah.
you see the story, you know the beginning and the end, you know what came on either side of it, and hopefully what you do is you can take some context from that and sit back and go, oh, well, if this is a story, what part of the book are we in right now? How should I be behaving or treating what's happening here, given the context of a myth system that says, hey, watch out for the asteroids, or, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see the shape of a story where it's hard to
Yes.
see the shape of your life, just the events that are.
That's exactly it. And because stories are not told in real time, if they were, we'd need to set out an entire year every time we want to read Lord of the Rings.
Well, yeah, we still
Yeah,
do.
or we'd have to take 2 years if we want to eat and sleep. Yeah. So they're not told real time. They are condensed, and it's like every day is a little tiny grain of wheat. And if you chew on the wheat, it's pretty boring. But if you take a whole wheat field and you harvest it and you burn it and you distill it, you get whiskey, if you do it right.
Right, so you're like, it's like this potent.
Myth is the same way. It distills from all these days into this single story. And if you are able to step back and say, oh, my day is a day in this story, so
Right.
it's not ordinary, it's not dismissible, it's part of this mythic structure.
Right.
And the awareness of that is something that I think we should take from stories and books and myths.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I
like
might
we
be
can
wrong.
see, when we're never interested in these stories when we're still in the Shire at the beginning, right? Like
No, we're
these
not.
stories
We're
are not
not.
interesting. That's the time that we go to them, the time that we gravitate toward them is when we're somewhere in the middle and we need that reminder of where we came from and the fact that there is a place that we're going. That this we're not going to be stuck in the middle.
We're not stuck in the middle forever. Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right, I think. I think.
Well, I know that you're really interested in the hero's journey and the Joseph Campbell sort of mapping out of this myth.
Yeah,
How'd
yeah.
you get into that? Do you remember when you first became aware of the hero's journey as a title to encompass this idea?
Well, ever since I was but a wee shaver, I wanted to be a mythic hero. And so I would run around the house with a kitchen towel stuffed in my shirt for a cape, and I would bring the cat to justice. And she was not similarly enthused by my exploits.
Well,
But
the villain never is, though.
the villain never is. See, she was a villain. I knew it. And growing up, I was doing the whole thing. I was making swords and shields, and I wore this shirt of chainmail to school and high school underneath my real shirt, and I was kind of weird. I did not. Joseph Campbell had already done his seminal graduate work before then, but I did not become aware of it as a field of study or as his monomyth, a structure for understanding the narrative. I think until I was in graduate school the first time around. First time I was in graduate school, I was actually in seminary at the Graduate Theological Union in the Bay Area. And I became aware of Joseph Campbell, and I read Hero with a Thousand Faces and The Power of Myth. And there are some things that I would disagree with Joseph Campbell about. And I became aware after a while that there are other narrative structures that can be used to understand a story, not just the individual focused hero journey. There are lots of other mythic structures that focus on different focal points. But the hero's journey is one that I gravitated to partly because of this very meta twist, because my hero's journey was to be a hero. It doesn't have to be. Your hero's journey can be to be a great baker or to have a little bookstore, or, I mean, it doesn't have to be dealing with heroes, but mine did because of the issues we were talking about earlier about parenting and seeking the approval of the gods. So it was in my early 20s that I came across Joseph Campbell and started to look at things through that lens.
Yeah, I mean, as the children of our parents, so our parents are the gods. They created us, they created the world, and we come into this world not understanding our mortality or theirs. So everybody is immortal, and so you assumed, as we all do, identified with that immortality, that hero position. So is that why you're saying that your hero's journey was to be a hero? And then when your parents fell from Mount Olympus and became mortals, there was maybe a break there for you, or maybe it came later when you realized your own mortality, that you were not an immortal hero. Is that sort of what you're talking about?
Wanting to be a hero was a combination of two things. First of all, when we're kids, we're all going to have things that we're interested in. I loved going up in the woods and looking for salamanders and snakes and frogs because my dad was a fisheries professor. Sorry, again, all the thoughts get stuck at the funnel. My desire to be a hero is a combination of my delight in myth and stories and Greek myths and British folklore and everything, Lord of the Rings, the chieftains, Irish music, everything you can throw into that pot and boil it up. But it was also because I thought if I were only good enough, then I would get my mother's approval. Yeah. It's so basic in pop psychology as to be very boring, but that's what was going on. I had an awareness of my own mortality very, very young. I had a bookcase fall on my head and cave in this part of my skull when I was 11.
Wow.
And the neurosurgeon had to rebuild it. And they kind of just handed me back and said, here, if he turns into a frog, let us know. I never saw the x-rays. My parents never did any of that. But arising out of that, I had periods of severe dissociation, loss of knowing what was real and what wasn't. And I had a choice at that point to trust, like we say, the gods, the family narrative, or follow this other thing, which C.S. Lewis called the inconsolable longing. What is it when you read a story and it just leaves you weeping in your chair when the story's over? You're not necessarily happy, but you're not sad, because it happens even with happy endings. There's something that is resonating inside you that has been distilled from the story. My mother didn't understand that. My mother was a concert pianist. And when she gave her senior recital, she played Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto, which is technically really difficult, and a bunch of other stuff, and her senior committee published their review of her recital in the local paper. I don't know why. I mean, I wasn't around back then, but it said, Francis Fleming's piano recital of this and this and this was technically flawless, very impressive, and emotionally dead. Like, whoa, there's some harsh words.
Wow.
I didn't find that out until later. But my mother never understood my stories. She didn't get The Lord of the Rings or Ray Bradbury. She wouldn't get Neil Gaiman or any of those things.
So do you agree with the reviewers about your mother? Did you feel as a child that she was emotionally dead?
Yeah.
Okay.
She had no ability to relate to me or engage with me on any level. So, like a kid who's trying to survive, you think, well, I better up the ante so I get some parental attention.
Yeah.
And my brother, who's older than me, the academician of the family, I saw him engaging with mom quite a bit. And I was like, well, what's wrong with me? And he told me later, he's like, oh man, what a nightmare. After my mother passed away, we compared notes and found out that our experiences had been a lot more similar than not. But I had this accident. I didn't have a vocabulary for it. And my mother didn't have a vocabulary for it. She couldn't relate to what I was experiencing. And so I had that choice right there when I was 11 or 12 to accept the parental paradigm, which meant that I was a bunch of stuff that wasn't too good, or step off into this unknown, this resonance that makes us weep at the end of stories. What is that? Well, it's this barest thread, this just tiny, tiny flute playing in the distance. And if we follow it, does it go somewhere? Or do we end up getting eaten by monsters? Yeah. Meaning, if we follow it, maybe we're really insane and we're going to end up in a padded cell and not have a job and, get rejected. If we accept the parental role, then we might be, like we were talking, we might be bad and less than and have imposter syndrome, but at least we'll know those waters and we have a map.
It's really hard to tell the difference between, a room that is safe, a shelter, and a prison sometimes. And
I think you're absolutely right. Speaking of the books that we were reading, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, the body keeps the score. Yeah.
Yeah. What did you find
Oh my gosh.
for you in the body? What resonated what resonated for you in this?
Oh.
This is by Bessel van der Kolk, ein gutes deutsches Name, a professor of psychologist.
Yeah. I started, so a friend of mine who is a therapist, he recommended a few months ago that I might like this book. And so I bought it, and then it sat next to my bed for a little while. And I told myself, there was another guest on the show. I think it was actually when Helen Austin of Big Little Lions was on here. I think we started talking about
she's
this book.
great. I love her.
Yeah, she's fantastic. And it was, I think, in that conversation that I decided that I was going to read that book and finish it by the end of 2021, because I just felt like there was a lot that had come up for me in that year. And I had realized, especially there was an event that happened in the fall, and I won't get into the details of the story, which is, of course, that's where the interesting part is. But I'll leave those out and just say that
Leave the dirt.
yeah, as I was driving away from this situation, I was sort of in, like, I had this feeling of shock inside me, and for days afterwards, I found myself turning to my past and realizing that there were just sinkholes in my past history, in my personal history, and I had just gotten used to these sinkholes, and maybe at this point in my life I was a little bit curious about, why am I calling them sinkholes? What exactly was that? Where did they happen? Why did they happen? What's in them? I wanted to start to measure them, take their measure, like
Now you're talking.
take out a tape measure and like start to measure how far across, what color is the blackness of this hole, and is it filled with water, or is the water covered with ice, or is it just like
Why do you have to go around it? Why? Yes,
yeah, what is
yes.
this thing? And what's down there? And so it was in talking with this friend who's a therapist. He said, you might want to read The Body Keeps the Score. And I was like, okay. So I bought it, put it on the nightstand, and then decided while I was talking with Helen that I would finish it by the end of the year. Well, I didn't finish it by the end of the year, but I started it in December and finished it just earlier this week, I think, Monday or Tuesday. So... and pointedly have not brought it on this show to talk about. So I feel like that to me indicates that there were like I'm still unpacking the content.
Yes.
But this is a long preamble to say that when you mentioned your brother, the question that I was about to ask you was, what's the age difference? Because when I read 2 years, okay, so when I read The Body Keeps the Score, I was reflecting a lot on me and my brother. I'm the older of the two of us, and there's 6 years between us, and we lived because my family moved around a lot. We lived in a lot of different states, and when I was a adolescent into teenage years, we lived in New Jersey, and when he was those ages, my parents lived in Florida, and I was no longer in the house, and so the household was very different. It was almost like we were, siblings, but both only children. And
yes, that age difference, yes.
6 years. And I realized that the issues that had been so dominant in my mind, in my makeup, in my history, were not the same issues as for him. And that we actually have two completely different stories, two completely different pain groups, I guess.
Yeah.
And maybe, and we don't have much of a relationship, and maybe that's why, because we have for all these years assumed that the other got it, because we're technically part of the same family, but really we're not. I don't think understand what the other person's childhood was like.
No,
so that's something
I think
got from the book.
Yes, and trying to think. I read this, and I was thinking mostly about how things are stored in the bodily memory.
Yeah.
Not so much my head accident, because that's a very physical, and it's got very identifiable repercussions. But how the brain is working, how it processes information, and how it sticks at a certain point, and unless you solve it, you can write these. If you're a programmer, you write these little interrupts that go around the problem, like your sinkhole.
Yeah.
But that's considered kludge code. The way to do it is go back and reconstruct the sinkhole and write it from the beginning. And this one was hard to read in some places.
Yeah.
But I thought it was really outstanding, and I wonder sometimes about what I'm still trying to unpack.
Yeah.
And so let me ask you a question, and Lewis, if Lewis is still around, he will understand this, because Lewis understands stories. Like I said, I'm writing this show about the hero's quest and my own stuff. So I've been rereading all of my favorite stories.
Yeah.
What are stories that you have read, or maybe music that you have heard, or films that you have watched, that result in what I would call what C.S. Lewis called the inconsolable longing, the thing that reaches into your heart and rips it out. It's not necessarily tragedy like, oh, that was really sad. And it's not, it's something else. It's this yearning, this longing for something that is not defined, but it's like, you can't read the story or watch the movie without just, I'm just going to bring my Kleenex with me.
Oh,
and
yeah.
everybody go away.
Well,
So what do you have?
Yeah, I think that in some ways it's when it ends, that book or movie, it's this loss. Like there's a moment of grief, right? That that feeling that even if whether it was happy or sad, in narrative, it touched something that needed to be touched. I think of it like a bruise. Like when you have a bruise, you can't stop. Like, is it still there? Oh yeah. Is it still there? Oh yeah. Is it still like it's like press, press, press? And as long as you're still in that book or in that movie, that is getting to that spot that you hadn't like nothing else had touched it or it hadn't been touched in a long time. You're like, oh yeah, there's something there.
There's something there. And can I ask, what are those books or movies for you? What are your favorites? What are the ones?
Gosh, it's hard for me to think about, strangely, it's really hard for me to think about what book, but immediately I thought of the movie Out of Africa, and I have read the book as well. But that movie, and the book is beautifully written. Oh my gosh,
Yes.
Isaac Dynson, gorgeous writer, and it's so delightful to read, to know the film, and I know it very well because I have a lot of tissues that I've used. But the book is wonderful, but the movie every time cannot help crying. Also, Fiddler on the Roof. Fiddler on the Roof, and I think part of that it has to do with it's a really particularly great film, but also because of my family background and my Jewish culture that I grew up in. I realized in watching that film more recently that I have this association. My father is Tevye. Like these characters in the book are like very real, people in my psyche. They are those mythical creatures.
Yes.
But yeah, but Out of Africa is the one that I first thought of when you asked that. Yeah.
Oh, Out of Africa. I at the end, when Klaus Maria Brandauer comes to Meryl Streep and says that Robert Redford's dead.
Oh.
And she says, why did you come? And he says, I thought I should. And she looks at him and she says,
Oh, you're very brave.
God, you're brave.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yes.
And,
Oh.
And Ben Berg just mentioned Dances with Wolves. And I just saw Dances with Wolves for the first time I think it might have been on New Year's Day this year.
Oh.
And that I really enjoyed that film. There was a lot about that, so I can completely understand that. Lewis says 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Hang on, let me think for a minute. Somewhere in a room, light years from Earth, a baby opened its eyes and began to cry. I remember that from when he's in the end and the monolith is there and he becomes the space baby, and nobody understood it in the movie theaters.
Kray, what about you? What book or movie for you?
It just goes on forever.
Yeah.
A lot of it is Ray Bradbury.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not exactly sure why.
Yes.
I have stolen so much from Ray Bradbury.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, can we just stay with Ray Bradbury for a minute?
Ray Bradbury was... Okay, Ray Bradbury, right here. Ray Bradbury.
Yeah.
He, for whatever reason, it was just brilliant. Maybe it was, I discovered him at exactly the right time. But he had, the way he writes was just marvelous. And so I stole, The Captain and the Lady is from The Sailor Home from the Sea. And I had an old song which was on my very first tape. I dare say you're probably not old enough to remember tapes. Little cassette tapes?
I think that I look younger on camera.
Well, I had a tape. And there was a song on it called Spaceman, which I had lifted from S is for space and R is for rocket. But Ray Bradbury, his ability to touch this inconsolable longing is remarkable in my opinion, and he was so prolific. And when we talk about being creative and collecting your rejection slips, I have read, and I think it might be apocryphal, that Bradbury himself said in his little book, Zen and the Art of Writing,
Yeah.
that he wrote like 800 stories before he sold his first one, which was The Lake. He sold it to, I think, Mademoiselle or the New Yorker back in the 50s. But oh yeah, I could go on forever about Ray Bradbury.
You know, I mean, people talk about they think about him anyways, a science fiction writer, but I think of him as a literary writer. And
Yes.
he is just a really beautiful, eloquent, deep writer.
He was.
Yeah.
He was marvelous and phenomenal, and oh yeah, I could go on forever about all of these stories in here that just, whatever they were, when I was a kid, they were exciting and marvelous, and Something Wicked This Way Comes was fantastic, but every now and then in these stories here and there, it wasn't just fun and exciting and fantastic. The inconsolable longing would reach out and grab, and whatever that is, that resonance is, I think, perhaps the most pivotal expression of our humanity. And I could just bore everybody for hours by reading Ray Bradbury, and
The thing is, it wouldn't bore anybody. When I was a kid, there was a short film. I think it was produced by HBO, and it was All Summer in a Day. It was a short film based on Ray Bradbury's short story, and I watched it over and over. And that's one of those box of tissues films. But then when I got to high school, 9th grade, I did not understand the point of the lunchroom. I didn't understand the point of spending an entire 40 minutes eating lunch, or spend an entire 40 minutes hanging out with people, sitting in this room with these tables and these chairs and the smell of French fries. Like, I just didn't like it. And so instead I went to the library, and I want to say hi to Tracy Threefoot, who says Tracy the librarian.
Hey, Tracy the librarian.
And I went to the library, and I can't quite say, but I know that the first thing that I went to was the Ray Bradbury stack and read that story, and then started reading some of his other stories. And eventually, I mean, I just loved libraries. They were my home, basically.
Yes, yes.
But eventually, and this is sort of the story of my life, the friction or the integration of stories and music, because the friction between and because that lunchtime I spent in the library until I was able to get my schedule changed so that I could take chorus during that 4th period. And so then after that, I never had a lunch. I just took chorus during my lunch hour. So it was like always this books and music, kind of thing. But yeah, I associate Ray Bradbury specifically with, certain times in my life, and that's one of them.
Yeah, Ray is, boy, I couldn't say enough about him. And I remember reading once, in his book on writing, he originally wrote this short story about the family, homecoming, and he sent it off to the New Yorker, and he didn't hear anything. He finally figured, well, they're not going to publish it. But he sent him a letter anyway, just checking up, and they answered back, and they said, well, we got the story, and rather than change the story, edit it a little bit to fit the magazine, we're going to change the magazine to fit the story. And then did this whole October Halloween issue of the New Yorker built around the story, The Homecoming. And that ultimately went and became the Addams Family. And he took all of his stories about the family and wrote From the Dust Returned, which came out just a few years before he died, which was just marvelous. And
wow.
Yeah, and the 800 stories before you get published, that's always encouraging.
Yes. And I like how you say that you're collecting rejection slips, because there's a part, I think, of an artist, writer, musician, whatever, before you start sending your stuff out, when you're just doing your thing and you're aching. You want to kind of leap from the place where you are, which is really a student, but you're creating this stuff, and you want to leap from there onto the grand stage, onto the New Yorker pages or whatever it is, and you want to skip the whole putting it out there in the world and allowing it, your body of work or your single piece of art, to be weighed against someone else's sensibilities. Not to judge whether it's worth existing in the world, but simply to have it, pressed up against someone else's particular sensibilities at that subjective moment in time. And that's a whole other, I think, important level of artistry that, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's not necessary. If you want to be a hobbyist and you want to remain a hobbyist, I think that is absolutely a wonderful way to spend your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Spending time with this hobby. But if you aspire to do your art professionally, or at least have I think that the point of a story is to be read. The point of a song is to be heard. And so if you don't want to just create it, but you want to actually have it resonate in someone else's mind, you've got to send it out and collect. It can be a game. Collect rejection slips. How many rejection slips can I collect? Because that shows that I'm at that level of artistry. I'm doing that.
And you're putting it out there, and you're getting rejected, but you're putting it out there. And we were talking about having faith in your process, or at least faith in stepping off into the dark and following that little flute. That includes putting out bunches of stuff that gets rejected, or people go, but you can't do it without those. You think of how many songs from your favorite musician are out there that when you got to it on the CD, you skipped over it. I mean, they all had stuff where you just love them and you'll cry and you'll go to the James Taylor, and then you get to the one James Taylor, I skip that. So even your favorites, they have stuff out there that you just go, yeah, whatever. Yeah. And I just spent 4 months learning some coding, some animation coding. And I made this little animation video, these little dancers on the subway, to this story that I tell. It's 4 or 5 months of weird stuff happening to my characters. I felt like I was remaking The Thing, because the head would be over here and the body's over here, and there's this little connector. And I finished it and I put it out there, and everybody was just like, there was no great, oh, that's really good. I was like, whatever. So, all right, you just keep going. Maybe take a day and be morose and sulk about it, but you can't dwell on it, and you can't judge yourself as saying, oh, I'm a really bad creator because I created something that was just kind of like, well, yeah, whatever. Yeah. But you just keep going, and Kurt Vonnegut had a friend who just finished his novel and wrote to Kurt and was kind of complaining because he just published the novel and wasn't being talked about, nobody was reviewing it. And so he said, Kurt, I just finished this novel. And Kurt interrupted and said, have you started the next one? Or Martha Graham was talking to a dancer, or a choreographer, the one who choreographed Oklahoma. And it was this huge hit. And she was like, really? I just whipped that out in the bathroom. That's not good stuff. But her greatest works, people just were kind of meh. Yeah. And Martha Graham said, that's the nature of what you do. You do what you do, and you put it out there, and you move on to the next, and you'll never be satisfied.
Well,
And
you also have to do it the best. You have to bring to fruition your vision as close as you possibly can. Refine it. But also know that, it might not be the right time in history for your thing. That shouldn't stop you from putting it out. Maybe that Martha, that choreographer was, putting out great work, the ones that nobody was paying attention. Maybe it just wasn't, the society wasn't ready or whatever, but that shouldn't ever stop us from, creating the very specific thing that we need to do, whatever it might be.
I think that's really true. There was a swordsman in Japan years ago who was writing about a school of swordsmanship who continued to practice swordsmanship as a way of examining enlightenment even after the Meiji Restoration, where everybody said, ha, Budo and martial arts is garbage, and they all threw it out. And he said, in the changing of the times, they were like autumn lightning, a thing out of season, an empty promise of rain that would fall unheeded on fields already bare. And I love that. It's marvelous.
I can't wait for you to read that Nachmanovich book for you.
Oh yes, I gotta go get that. You gotta send me that. Nachmanovich.
Nachmanovich, Stephen Nachmanovich free play. I
Free
feel
play.
like just listening to you talk and this whole conversation, the way that you draw associations across domains, and I think that you will really appreciate that book.
Oh, I gotta get that one.
And speaking of books, we this is such a great conversation. I want to keep talking about all of the things that we have just touched on.
All the books.
But what is the book that you brought in today? Was there a particular book, and was there a passage that you wanted to share from anything?
Oh, good heavens. I
Or
have my stack right here.
improvise it. You're like, yes, actually, I planned that.
Yes. Well, get comfy. Well, you know, I said I was working on this show about the hero's quest and making it personal, not just an academic diatribe. And so I've been rereading all of these Ray Bradbury stories. Some of the greatest writing that I have read has not been from the science fiction, fantasy fiction category. I think some of the greatest lines ever written in the English language, Norman MacLean. In the end, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. The river was cut by the world's great flood and runs over rocks from the basement of time. On some of the rocks are timeless raindrops. Under the rocks are the words, and some of the words are theirs. I am haunted by waters. I think those are some of the best lines ever written. And let's see if I can find it here. This is a book called The River Wye by David James Duncan. And it's about fly fishing and other things in the Pacific Northwest. And the narrator is kind of a dork who barely graduates high school, and all he wants to do is go fishing. And so he has this little fishing cabin up on the Tamanawas River, which is not a real river. It's probably the Rogue River in Oregon. And he, in his story, he comes across a drowned fisherman who's drowned in the river. And he pulls the body out, and it throws him into this self-reflection. We're talking about mortality and the awareness of death. And I'm not going to be able to read this without Kleenex, but in my cabin on the Tamanawas, the pine knot crumbled and vanished. I was alone. It was pitch dark. And at once there came a vision of Abe, the drowned fisherman, vivid as dreamy light before my eyes. His head was rising from a green surface, but the green was not river water. It was grass, a wild, unending lawn. His gray hair was still sodden, his eyes still astonished, but the gaping mouth was closed. Behind him rose a verdant ridge, like Tamanawas Mountain, but unlogged and 100 times higher, and all about him the plain of meadow grass, so green it glowed. He seemed to be looking toward me, and the once filmy eyes were clear now and alive. The soggy shirt rose into view, and then the waterlogged waders that drowned him. And when at last he stood free upon that wide meadow, he smiled, then chuckled, then laughed and laughed, holding his hands high above his head and turning in slow, joyful circles, turning upon the meadow as he faded from my sight.
Thank you.
So what did you bring?
Well, I love memoir that is essayistic, meaning it's searching for something. The writer is writing it to understand something. And so I don't read a lot of biography, because typically it's a reportage of what happened with someone's life. They're usually a celebrity. I'm not drawn to that kind of book typically. That said, there are some incredible women songwriters that have put out some memoirs. And this is not one that was even on my radar, and then it suddenly was, and I decided at the end of the year, yes, I need to read it, and it was wonderful. Jules' memoir, Never Broken. Songs Are Only Half the Story is the subtitle, and she's one of your Alaska
Yes.
folk. She grew up in Alaska, lived in Hawaii for a little while, and
Oh, she did? I didn't know
California.
that.
Yeah, for a
Oh,
little
wow.
while. I learned through her book. But you and Jewel have kind of trod some similar paths, at least in terms of states that you've lived in. And you know, when I first started the book, I didn't know anything about her life. I remembered her hit songs in the 90s and her really expressive voice. I mean, just kind of remarkable how quickly she pivots through emotions, like very, very fast in a really masterful way. And anyway, I had no idea about her life, really. I thought I would bring that book in and just share this little piece of it toward the end. She says, "Here I am again. I am 41. My feet quit growing further from my face quite a while ago, but my body continues its wise evolution, and I am awake in here. Like Plato's theory of forms in the allegory of the cave, we witness shadows cast on the wall and strive to know the shadows are not reality, and that like those prisoners chained within the walls of the cave, we are constantly tasked to know reality beyond the shadows cast forth upon our world." Plato's Phaedo contains similar imagery to the allegory of the cave. A philosopher recognizes that before philosophy, what I call self-reflection, his soul was, quote, "a veritable prisoner, fast bound within his body, and that instead of investigating reality by itself and in itself, it is compelled to peer through the bars of its prison." Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," but for me, perhaps, it is more accurately described as, "I perceive what I think, therefore I am." So I'll just leave it at that. I like the way that she said that. I perceive what I think, and therefore I am. And she talks about, I mean, that's largely what the book is about, her spiritual evolution of
That's
understanding
marvelous.
and rising above her own traumas. So, yeah, quite a remarkable human being.
Oh, I'm going to have to read that. That's extremely eloquent. She knows how to write.
Yeah, the writing is beautiful, and she does have a background in philosophy, which I hadn't known. And
I
she
didn't know
she
that.
had studied it and taken quite an interest in it. So there you go. That's mine.
Oh, wow.
And Lewis asks if either of us have read Mary Gaucher's bio, and I actually just started it last night. Saved by
I
a
have
Song.
not. No.
So Mary.
Oh,
Gaucher.
I didn't put the comments thing on, so I can't see what anybody's saying. And it's so far away I can't read. Lewis, I'm sorry, I can't see.
Yeah, put it up again. Have you read Mary?
Now,
Gaucher's
tiny
bio?
me, you muffins. No, that's not it.
So yeah, I actually started it. I'll probably talk about it next week on the show.
Very cool. Who do you have coming in next week?
Oh my gosh, I can't remember.
Yeah.
I haven't.
Why you do me like this? I give you this great intro.
Because I've been so focused on you, Kray.
Oh, yes, well.
But really, normally I have a running list in my head, but something about the holiday season and the new year, I just completely unraveled. Kray, will you play us a song? We're coming up on the end of the show, and
yeah,
we have to hear you. I want to say that something that I've come to understand about you is that, you know, the word troubadour is thrown around a lot, but you really are a troubadour. That is, you know, you're a traveler. You're telling stories. You're using song, but also stories, and just really wonderful in a delightful way. So,
well, thank you. That's very nice of you to say.
play us something.
I'm going to. Since we were talking about Ray Bradbury, I'm going to do a tune from which I have stolen several lines of this one from Ray Bradbury. He caught a train out of La Mancha carried him down to the sea. Give me one-way ticket to where you think I'd rather be. I don't know where the sun rises now. I don't know where she will be. He caught a train from a Spanish sunrise, headed into an Irish sea. And out upon a tossing ocean, he was sick with the movement of the waves. In the desk he found a faded journal, and he settled down to reading every page. The sun had gone down, and his lamps had all burned low, when the last entry finally set him free. He caught a train from a Spanish sunrise, headed into an Irish sea. There came the sound of summer running as he stood beside the railing in the dawn, and a half-remembered memory inside him awakened from a slumber decades long, and casting aside the mirrored face he wore, against his tale a gentle mutiny. He caught a train from a Spanish sunrise, headed into an Irish sea. Time flies like an arrow, straight toward the setting sun with nothing left behind. A season fine for Prometheus set free, and a medicine for melancholy found upon the sea. He caught a train out of La Mancha, and it carried him down to the sea. Give me a one-way ticket to where you think I'd rather be. I don't know where the sun rises now, and I don't know where she will be. He caught a train from a Spanish sunrise, headed into an Irish sea.
Thank you so much.
And now you have a new one.
I do. Oh boy. I do. Thank you for playing that. It was beautiful.
Oh,
I
you're
love
very
the
welcome.
refrain that just comes back. And what's the name of that song again?
Well, stolen directly from Ray Bradbury, it is, oh, I don't have it, where's my copy? A Medicine for Melancholy.
Oh, and that was one of my favorite lines in the song, so that's lovely. Yeah. But I'm surprised that I was expecting you to say that the title was, Train from La Mancha or Sun or something.
No, A Medicine for Melancholy was the title story of a collection, A Medicine for Melancholy, published in 1954. But I've stolen so much from him. I have, here's The Machineries of Joy, and I've got a tune on the last C, or the Road to Elfin, called The Machineries of Joy. The Sound of Summer Running, a line in the song, is one of his short stories about getting new tennis shoes. I steal so much from him, it's just disgusting.
Oh, well, have you alerted his estate?
I have not, although I did.
I don't mean in a permission-seeking sense. I just mean in a, hey, I love him, and I have written all.
Oh, I'm
so,
sure they
I've
get
taken
millions
so much,
of things. I did get formal permission on the Road to Elfland, the album cover. I've got a bunch of quotes and things, and there's a little book inside that has a bunch of quotes, and on the back it has a quote from a Ray Bradbury story, The Machineries of Joy. And thus happily sent forth at our best, with good grace and fine wit, on calm noons and in fair climes, Are we not God's machineries of joy? And I got a little email back from his estate. Yeah, that's fair use. Don't bug us, kid.
Pat on your head. Send you
Yeah,
on your way.
go on now. It's fourth period. Go to lunch.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you for that. I'm going to play a song that I started to sketch out before COVID, and then played it a little bit, but there was just something that wasn't coming together, and then last week I pulled it out again and reworked some of it, and so this is the song that I'm going to play. Fine by Yourself. I wrote this before COVID. It had nothing to do with, being alone in your quarantined shed, but it sort of took on a different feeling for me once the pandemic hit. And now it's started to change for me again. I initially wrote it inspired by my divorce from my first marriage, and was reflecting on the really beautiful and tender time that came after that. And so Fine by Yourself. And here we go. Let's see here. So let's hope that I remember it. You have a remarkable memory for obviously for all of these writers that you've quoted, all of these movies. Let's see if I can remember my own song. There we go. False starts. Here we try again. When you blink your eyes at the yellow stripe of sunrise through the curtain, when you stretch your limbs and an X across the bed, when you rise without alarm clocks ringing, catch yourself in the kitchen singing, put daffodils and water on the shelf. Ooh, 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 you're doing fine by yourself. When you dust the bike and pump the tires, throw an apple in your bag. When you pedal down some street you never knew. When you notice how the season's turning, notice that your heart's not yearning. In fact, you're feeling rather well. Ooh, ooh, you're doing fine by yourself. Funny how you thought the world would end. Strange to find instead that when the day is done and you're back at home with a jelly jar of wine, when you're curled up on the sofa with a book, you realize that for all your fears there's a tenderness you're finding here. And on the flip side, a farewell. Ooh, 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 you thought you'd never live to tell. You're doing fine by yourself.
That's marvelous. I love it.
Thank you. It was such a leap when I started doing the show. Every week I got so nervous just to be on camera,
Oh my
just
God,
to talk
yes.
to people, the improvisation of the conversation. There were so many, churning stomach moments, and also I decided to up the ante and just say, you know what, I'm just going to bring in a new song. So there was a little while when I was bringing in a new song every week onto this show.
Oh, that's marvelous. I've never been able to put that amount of stuff out.
And it was just like, I don't know, there was just this feeling of like, unrealness about the times, I guess, and
Yeah.
just a celebration of process and not being so concerned about a final polished product. And I think that I
Yes.
still really like that about the show. I like that it's a conversation. It's not, there's just all of that improvisation and I think authentic connection because of that. So
Yeah. It's dynamic. It's alive.
yeah, it's alive. It's alive. Kray,
It's alive.
it's alive. Kray, thank you so much for being my guest this week. This was awesome to connect with you. I can't wait to see you
Very
in
nice.
person at something.
Yeah. Well, at some
At
point.
something.
Yeah. And Tracy and Lewis, if you're still around, I'm gonna be in Maine in September, and I'm booking that trip right now. Everybody's still like, well, we're not sure what's going on with Omicron, so who knows what will happen. But I'm working hard on getting out to your neck of the woods and seeing you both. So thank you for
Love
coming
it.
by.
Love it. Kray, where would you like people to most support you?
Oh,
is
that's
there
a nice way to
something-
put it. I like that.
Yeah.
No, I just look at guitar porn every night going, whoa, look at this custom luthier. And my wife's like, yeah, whatever.
So people should send you guitars. is
Send
what you're
guitars.
saying.
No,
All the guitars go to Kray.
all the guitars. I get all the guitars. No, actually, I mean, I have a PayPal account, just my email address, but things are difficult right now. I would like people just to go to my website, which is just krayvankirk.com, and you can listen to everything directly from the music page. I wrote some custom code, so I'm not limited by the Spotify 30-second preview. People can just listen to whatever they want. I've got all the music videos there, including the little puppet animated dance video, which was kind of like, yeah, whatever. And just, and come see a show when I'm in town. That would be really, really nice. I drove 3,000 miles in September to play a show for one person who was the person from high school that I was visiting and staying with. So those kind of shows are hard. So if you're out and about, come out and see a show.
Yeah. And can they sign up on your mailing list or something on your website?
I
so that
do.
They can, do you send out information about upcoming shows?
I have a mailing list, and it's on the contact page of the website. I need to put it on the front, but I'm so shy about, I don't want to clutter people's inboxes, and I don't have anything to say, and none of it's important, and I should not bug people because they will be offended. And
I
so
know, it's hard.
I have this mailing
That's-
list, but I have yet to send much out on it.
Okay, but you are on Bands in Town, right? So if people follow...
No,
Oh,
I'm
you're
not on
Okay.
Bands in Town. All of my
Goodness
shows are
gracious.
listed on my
Okay.
shows page.
Okay, so they got to go to your website and they can check out your shows.
Yes, they can check out
Yeah.
shows and some pictures of me back when I had a big beard and hair down to here.
You guys,
That was a long time
we
ago.
can't miss that. We got to go to his
That's a long
website
time
to
ago.
check out. All right, Kray, you stay right there. I'm going to say goodbye and just so grateful. Thank
Thank
for
you very
being here.
much.
Yeah. I loved this conversation. It's so funny. Kray and I had bumped into each other at some conferences that were virtual, and we had chatted in the chat boxes, but we had never had a verbal conversation face to face until today. And this was just a lot of fun. I'm grateful. Find his music, follow him, come see a show when he's in your neck of the woods. And same here. If you are watching on YouTube or on Facebook, I hope that you will like or subscribe to my channel. And if you want to know more about me, visit my website, join my mailing list, join my Patreon. I would love to have you. That's where I do a lot of my creative writing and share new songs plus the backstories of the songs. So next week, same time, same place, I will have another guest. And every Thursday at 2 p.m. Pacific, we're live. So hope to see you. Catch the archives on my website as well. And until we meet again, take good care.